George, hello and welcome.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you for the invite.
Not at all. So I'm honoured to actually say you are my first and potentially last guest on on talking to Charlie. But I should also point out it is a Saturday because you inherently are a very very busy man. So your time is valuable, and as I say, it's an absolute privilege to have you on the show.
Well,
Um,
I'm honoured to be here with you, Charlie. So
Great.
thanks for
And,
the
and
invitation.
actually, in a different guise. So, for those who don't already know, George is my oncologist. And going back, I think it was 15 years now, was instrumental in changing my life for the better. But on this occasion, this is very much an informal conversation. I'm not going to get an invoice from you. I hope not, certainly after the show.
I'll let you off, Charlie. I'll let you off.
Just on this occasion, cancer comes in all sort of shapes and sizes, but obviously your sort of um, your prowess, if you like, is very much in the blood cancer field. So
Yeah.
but we can try and touch on a few sort of generic things, typically in sort of the broader landscape of cancer. But obviously, knowing full well that thank God, for my purposes anyway, rather selfishly, blood cancer was or is your specialist subject. So just sort of diving straight in, George, if you wouldn't mind. There was a stat going back 15 years. I think it was 1 in 3 people are likely to be affected by cancer in their lives. Fast forward 15 years, and that is now 1 in 2, which, quite frankly, from the outside looking in, is pretty terrifying by all accounts. But at the same point, and you know better than I would, we'd like to think that there is obviously advance or progress being made in all things treatment and medicine and otherwise. But from those stats alone, is that encouraging? Probably not. Or is it just something that is sort of testament that cancer sort of continues to win, if you like?
Well, no, come on, Charlie. Let's not go for something so depressing as cancer
Yes, right.
continues to
Okay, fair
win.
enough. Good man.
But
Wind it back.
I
Let's do
think
it.
why do I? So you say some kind words in the introduction, Charlie. So for your listeners, to remind them, of course, we do overlap and interact a lot with solid organ oncology. So we get a lot of general experience in cancer medicine in the work we do, but I'm not a specialist in other cancers. So my opinions are naturally over-influenced, I suspect, by my work in the blood cancer field. But yeah, so you started off by raising that interesting statistic about how many human beings are going to get cancer across their lifespan. So Charlie, I think there are some things to reflect on there. Number one, many cancers are diseases of older people. Now, you were a bit unlucky, of course. You got one of the young person cancers, but they're still relatively uncommon in younger people. There are some unlucky folk, there are unlucky families, etc., etc. But generally, a marker of a population that is living longer, and that means they're not dying from earlier cardiovascular deaths and other things or infectious deaths that we used to die
Mm.
from as a population a lot younger. So a marker is that more people get cancer. Now, of course, there are the headline terrible cancers. You can't walk away from pancreatic cancer. You can list things which are still very challenging where we've made few breakthroughs. But there are many other types of cancers that actually present in some ways a bit like a long-standing condition that people have. And again, drawing on my own field with the blood cancers, we have quite a few of our disorders that present in more elderly individuals. And you know what? They often don't hugely impact on their life. And I'm saying that very carefully because, of course,
Mm.
you'll have some of your listeners where that simply is not the case. But there is, I don't want to say some lightness behind that pretty tough statistic, but I hear what you're saying. The actual numbers in the population that 1 in 2, 1 in 3 of us are going to be directly affected by cancer firsthand. And of course, if you take your relatives and friends, it's inevitable that
Mm.
cancer is going to be knocking on your door.
Yeah, because the premise of this show is very much as a resource to sort of help those directly or indirectly affected by cancer. And as we just alluded to, I think it's inevitable, or that every single individual is going to be affected by cancer at some point in their
Yeah,
lives,
yeah.
be that directly or
I think
indirectly.
that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
what you're
can't
saying,
argue against that one.
no, no, exactly. But basically, in a summary, there, it's people are inherently living longer, but the sort of the broader sort of cancer landscape, if you like, is has more effect on the sort of elder demographic, if you like, as opposed to the young. As you alluded to, me Hodgkin's lymphoma, I think inherently it sort of affects those between the age of 20 and 40 that tend to live quite a healthy lifestyle, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, Hodgkin's is a strange quirk. One of the things that makes Hodgkin's very interesting is it's got this unusual type of presentation. It actually has what we call a biphasic age distribution, Charlie, to use a
Right.
technical word.
Do elaborate, because I'm completely confused by that already.
Well, it's the commonest cancer in young adults. So if you look at the
Really?
distribution of ages, yeah, so the commonest time to get Hodgkin lymphoma is probably between about 18 and 24. It then sort of drops off. So me, age 55, I'm sort of probably at that bottom end. But then Hodgkin's actually starts to rise again. And Hodgkin lymphoma in more elderly people becomes common again. They've got slightly different biologies behind them and unfortunately different outcomes. And I say that meaning that younger people, we now cure the very clear majority of young people who present with Hodgkin lymphoma. Older folk, it's not always as easy. The biology of the Hodgkin's is a bit different and they tolerate the more intensive treatments less well. So our chances of getting a cure are not quite as good. But Hodgkin's is a bit odd. And I think it is worth reminding your listeners that many, many cancers, without getting too stuck in molecular biology, are almost like a random degenerative disease of DNA. And I've got to translate that. I've got
Yeah.
to translate.
Again,
So
just from,
I'll translate it. So human beings, we are, of course, highly, highly complex organisms, and we are a collection of cells, and the cells themselves are made up because of that amazing complexity of the genomic environment. So our DNA with 4 billion base pairs in each cell, hard to even get to grips with what that means. But there's 25,000 genes that are working away, and each cell is making its proteins, doing its signaling, speaking to the next cell. It might be saying, I'm a healthy functioning liver cell, or it might be saying I'm a bowel cell, or I'm a breast cell, or a brain cell, etc., etc. They're working away, but cells divide, they grow, they die off, but there is random DNA damage that is picked up randomly. Now, you might accelerate your DNA damage by lying in the sun. You might accelerate it by smoking cigarettes. You might
was that a
accelerate
direct assassination at me? Because
I
you know
will at some
the
point
background.
tell your listeners about Charlie and how much he ignored my strong advice about lying.
I can edit this. You do realise.
You should, Charlie. You should. But the basic principle is life over your 70, 80 years is lots of cellular division, growth, and you just pick up random bits of DNA through life. Now, your environment, and all these things we can talk about, your diet, your lifestyle, your immune system, all of these things influence rates of accumulation of damage or whether damaged cells are killed off properly. It's a very complex picture, but the bottom line is you get more cancers as you get older because you've had more time to pick up the damage. And so that's a sort of this broad thing is why cancers generally get more common in older people.
Right. Okay. Because I was going to sort of pay mention to that. Blood cancer, as you say, sort of DNA related. But it's if there was anything you could sort of give advice to listeners to say, what can I be doing as a kind of preventative, be that, diet, exercise, avoid sun or everything otherwise. You can only
Yeah.
try so hard, but sometimes it's a case of say la vie, right?
Well, I think it is really important that your listeners understand that many cancers are totally random and out of the blue. I mean,
Mm.
Hodgkin lymphoma, you pointed out at the beginning, it tends to affect sort of often quite clean living souls that they've done
Yeah.
nothing wrong in their life and it springs out on them. Not everyone. Hodgkin's can associate with things which suppress the immune system, medications doctors give them, HIV, uncontrolled. There are all sorts of things that can associate with Hodgkin's, but most Hodgkin lymphoma patients, it's just come out of the blue, and that's that random shuffle of life. And
Right.
without getting too stuck on the biology of that, we've got a bit of a handle on that. A lot of them are driven by the everyday Epstein-Barr virus, glandular fever virus, kissing virus. I'm sure, Charlie, you were never
Oh,
kissed.
it's been a while, mate. But you mentioned that sort of cycle, so 20 to 40 in terms of sort of, I don't know, prime pinpoint, if you like, and then a sort of relapse, not a relapse, but then sort of come 70, 75.
Mm.
Why might that be?
Yeah, so again, that might the older ones might reflect the gradual failing of the immune system. I mean, I don't want to keep going on about how old age associates with all sorts of body
Yeah, exactly.
failures.
I don't want to grow old at this rate.
No, I know, Charlie. But it basically does. As we
Mm,
age, our immune system weakens, our surveillance for cancers weakens. Just at the time when, as I just talked about, your cells are aging, you've got more DNA mutations, you're more likely to randomly spin off a malignant cell. And you've got your sleepy immune system that's gradually going to sleep, and it doesn't
mm.
pick them off, doesn't lend them, so they allow them to grow. So more elderly Hodgkin's probably reflects that. The younger people Hodgkin's, a lot of it, as I was touching on there with the glandular fever virus, it can just a slightly abnormal processing of the glandular fever virus in the B cells, that part of the immune system, which makes your antibody cells. They get invaded by the Epstein-Barr. We normally clear them, and I must stress to your listeners, 90% of the UK population has had glandular fever, and the tiniest fraction gets Hodgkin lymphoma. So,
Wow.
don't go out panicking. But there probably is the randomness that connects a lot of young people between an Epstein-Barr viral infection and getting Hodgkin lymphoma.
Right. Okay. So going back to that 1 in 2, we shouldn't be too disheartened by that,
Oh
because,
no,
as you
you've got to
say,
go out.
it's an aging generation sort of population, etc. And otherwise, so in the positive there, to counteract that, we paid mention to the advancements or the progress being made in medicine and treatments and such like. Being an expert in your field, are you encouraged by what you see in terms of, be that UK, Europe, whatever, otherwise America, all the sort of those brains in in the cancer world coming together. Are you are
So
you encouraged by what you see in terms of that sort of
It's
progress being made?
remarkable, Charlie. So the
Yeah.
progress in cancer medicine, of course, it starts with understanding preventative measures. It then moves to screening. It then moves to early intervention and then moves to therapeutics. So actually, the advances happen at every step of the way. And the prevention, I didn't answer your question earlier about, lifestyle, keeping healthy. Every doctor moans and they tell people they shouldn't drink, shouldn't lie in the sun, shouldn't smoke, all the things that we know we basically shouldn't do.
The good
But
things in life
the good
we
things,
shouldn't
yeah,
do.
if you enjoy it, if it's nice, you probably shouldn't do it. There you go. So you shouldn't do all of that. The prevention, healthy lifestyle choices. I think we have to accept there are significant breakthroughs there. Gosh, my wife was reading something last week in the Time supplement. We've got to eat 30 grams of different types of nuts every day. Remember, I'm not a nutritionist, so don't
Right.
take my
Yes.
advice.
True.
Just what I read, and so you've got to
Yeah.
do all that type of thing. So those count as breakthroughs, I guess we should say, shouldn't we, Charlie?
Yeah. No. 100%.
Then what about the other next step? I said screening tools. Oh my goodness, the world of screening is going to be changing. So we have screening programs. Of course, we've got breast cancer screening. There's a bit of a debate about PSA as a screening for prostate cancer. So I think is it over 50 you get offered a PSA test. You've then got the bowel cancer screening, which is detecting blood in the stool. And I should have done a bit of reading to remind myself. I think that's after 60, but I'm sorry if I
Right.
got that wrong.
Yeah.
So screening. But the amazing advances coming away with screening are going to be molecular biology tools. So you may, or your listeners may have heard of this term, next generation sequencing, which is a remarkable breakthrough that was coming around when I was a postdoc here in Cambridge. So 15, 18 years ago, is how you can sequence vast amounts of DNA in a relatively quick time. And it's allowed us to do the whole genome sequencing of humans, for instance. Wind forward to why that matters for cancer screening. Well, cancers secrete tiny bits of DNA into the blood. So somebody with breast cancer or pancreas or kidney or bowel, etc., they're secreting small little bits that circulate around in the blood. And because each cancer tends to have clusters of mutations in the DNA, a bit like a fingerprint. So this one
Mm.
might be saying, this little cluster is a bit typical of a bowel cancer. This little cluster a bit typical of a lymphoma or lymphoid. And there's increasing data that supports the validity of these tests, that if you take a healthy donor, take their blood, do a whole generation, next generation sequencing. So we are talking billions of data points, but feeds through the computer, powerful algorithms interrogate it, and it might spit out, you know what, pancreas signal,
Mm.
or might spit out lymphoid signal. And so you can see that although this is still a little experimental, but I suspect this is going to go mainstream, that this type of thing will roll out, and then people may say, you know what, whether or not this is nationally commissioned, it might become commercially available, etc., etc. But you can see how cancer screening can move to a whole different level of using molecular biology to hunt for early cancers.
Right, yeah, because I was going to pay mention, in terms of symptoms or early signs. I know, sort of me personally, it wasn't until my lymph nodes above my collarbone had started swelling, and I sort of had a motley collection of all sort of shapes and sizes, etc. and otherwise, as well as sweating and sort of on the relapse point of view, I'd lie in bed and I would almost find myself weaning because I think from the pressure in my
Mm.
chest. But you know, if something is migrating in the chest, therefore not showing any sort of particular immediate symptoms, going back to your point, the whole sort of screening process, or even just a regular blood test of some
Mm.
description,
Mm.
would be very much advised, just for those that are trying to sort of, just keep a healthy body, healthy mind, or just at least sort of
Yeah.
understand what might be going on in one's body, particularly from a
Well,
cancer
indeed.
perspective.
So,
Or,
Charlie, because you of course are talking there about a symptomatic presentation of
right.
lymphoma, and
Yeah.
to recap, Hodgkin lymphoma most typically presents with in young people with a lump lower down in the neck, perhaps, and in the mediastinum, what we call the middle bit of the chest. So those are the commonest places, and young people with a mediastinal Hodgkin's can sometimes have a persisting cough, have some tightness, feel their breathing isn't right, etc., etc. And it's one of the reasons why we encourage people to get a chest x-ray if they've got persisting symptoms around the chest, looking for something. But that isn't necessarily screening. That's trying to diagnose somebody who's coming with a symptom and going to their
Right.
doc saying, you know what, doc, I'm just not well. 6 months ago,
Mm.
I was running around playing football, and now I got this sort of tightness in my breathing, and I got a lump at the bottom of my neck.
Yeah.
So that's quite different from screening.
Right.
But I think the whole thing, the premise been, what are our advances in cancer medicine? I think it's screening the asymptomatic patient, getting things early, because a lot of cancers, we must remember, still are treated with surgical approaches. You know, the lumpectomy, the mastectomy, the resecting of bowel cancer. Um, this type of thing is still of fundamental importance to a lot of solid organ cancers. With the blood cancers, it's a bit different. We tend to, as you know, use chemotherapy and radiotherapy sometimes.
Yeah. Wow. Fascinating. Okay. I'm not sure where to go from here. Well, I'm sort of bamboozled by this sort of information overload.
Well, I mean, I'm going to help you a bit, Charlie, because you did ask me to talk about the advances in cancer, and I sort of cut you off by sort of doing it's almost like an essay plan. I said, well, let's not jump straight to therapeutics. Let's talk
Yeah.
about lifestyle and prevention. But in terms of therapeutics, you said, am I encouraged by what I see? And
Hmm.
we have gone through, are going through, and will continue to go through a complete revolution in cancer therapeutics. And in my world, in chronic leukemia, I was giving a talk to our national patient group earlier in the year, and it was quite actually earlier in the year. It was in March last year, but because of the pandemic had got in the way, etc., etc. So a few years had passed since I'd done my last talk, and this is no exaggeration. The talk from the last time I presented to the national group, I could keep all of the introduction slides about the disease and the lifestyle and the welfare and how it presents, but every single slide talking about the treatment, I replaced. I got rid of all my old chemotherapy and what you do here, because that is a great example of how we've got these amazing new targeted therapies. We have targeted antibodies, we have targeted small molecule inhibitors. We've now got targeted immune modulators that help bring our own immune systems to attack the cancer. It is quite remarkable what is happening. And when we go to the conferences and we debate with colleagues and we talk with biotech and we talk with pharma, there are even more exciting things coming. So you've been blown away by last year's stuff, and then you start talking to some clever guys who are running some cutting edge biotech, and oh my goodness, I had no idea that might be a target. And it is amazing. It's very
This is awesome. Been really encouraging by all accounts, right? This is sort of
yeah, yeah,
intel
yeah.
from the inside, and just as you say, for people listening, recently diagnosed or otherwise, this is a massive takeaway in terms of sort of the positivity around, as you say, the advancements being made. So happy
Oh,
days. I'd almost do a little round of applause for that one.
well, don't applaud me. Don't
It might,
applaud me, Charlie.
that's
I'm
probably
now
why you're
finished.
avoiding these presentations, right? Because you've got to keep changing those slides inherently because everything keeps
That's
changing
right.
and
That's
updating.
right.
So, well, that's really encouraging. So that's fantastic news. Going more on a personal level, because you always, every time I see you, we don't have regular checkups now, but you have a wry smile, you have this sort of amazing energy and warmth about you want to come into your consultation room. But outside of the treatment, most people are there, or people are there generally because there is a diagnosis or there is concern, and you have to ultimately relay the news to your patient, and I can't even imagine how you even start that process, in terms of informing a patient. Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, mate, it is what it is. You have cancer, but
Well, yeah. I mean, Charlie, it is, of course, a fundamental part of working in my specialty. So you have
yeah. Do
to.
you need training for it? I mean, I wouldn't even know. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Oh
just
no,
you as a
gosh.
great personality, or it's extraordinary.
Uh, there are many, many courses you can go on, all sorts of different communication skills courses, Charlie. But I mean, there are things you've got to remember. You've got to remember fundamental things that the poor person in front of you, they are terrified. Of course, they're terrified. You've
Mm,
got to realize that they are going to have their own set of emotional responses. Some people cry, some people are lost, some people clearly just cannot take in the information you're giving them. And I
yeah.
think, I mean, I've been doing this job in Cambridge for 20 years now. I've run our lymphoma program for, anyway, a long time, 15, 16 years. And so, of course, you see all types, and there is not a good way or a bad way to receive bad news. Each individual is very different. But of
Mm,
course, there are strategies that are more effective. I mean, it has to be face to face. You have to have time. And you've got to also keep things really straightforward in that first meeting. Because even when I've got one of my university academics who, as you know, Cambridge is full of super bright, engaged people who within a
I wouldn't
month
know.
of
I
my
never went, but yes, I heard on the grapevine.
yeah, no, Charlie, I'm going to put you in that category.
Yeah,
Within a
thanks, man.
month, they've done loads of research and things. And it is a very interesting aspect of our life. But even these super switched on people, it takes time to process information.
Mm,
And actually, sometimes that breaking bad news consultation, you just can't really cover much information. Many patients come back and say, I can't remember anything you told me. And
yeah.
that's why, taking your example, a young person with Hodgkin lymphoma, the strategy that I've adopted over more recent years is to say, look, there's going to be loads to talk about. But as of today, the one message you've got to hear is there is a very good chance we're going to cure you of this. You're going to go on and have a normal life. I mean, I could have said to you, you're going to go on and then be doing podcasts in years to come, although I
Yeah.
wouldn't have done podcasts was 15 years ago.
Didn't
But,
you? I'm sure you did.
but I think the somehow to get some sort of positivity into a first meeting is very important because you're trying to give people things to clutch hold of. And another trick I've learned is you really give people clear follow-up time. So, we're doing this, we're going to do this scan, we're going to do that. I am seeing you in a week. I am seeing you in 2 weeks.
Mm,
These are the contact details. And these are within the NHS plan, and all good clinics know to operate like that. You've got to have communication details, you've got to have information, a named specialist nurse. Some people, let's be honest, don't communicate brilliantly with doctors, but they love talking to the nurses, of course. And so we've got to work out each communication style for each individual.
yeah, no, of course. Because going back to your point at 18, when originally diagnosed, as you say, there's just that element of sort of dumbfoundedness when you get that initial information or shock,
Well,
if you like,
18 years old. I
and
mean,
nothing.
18-year-olds, you're charging around
Well,
the
exactly. I think for me, you're like,
Facebook.
oh my god, I just want to go and have a pint or try and get laid. It is just one of those things, and it's just yeah, information overload. But
Yeah, I mean, do you remember anything from your first consultations? I bet you don't remember any details. So
I know, unfortunately, well, it wasn't you the first time because I had a different doctor then. But I just remember being sort of very sort of hands in my head, just like yeah, just like a sort of caught in the spotlight. Just like
yeah,
wow.
yeah,
Um,
it's tough. It's
and I
tough,
think
isn't it?
thereafter as well, exactly that. I think actually thereafter it was more as much as I've sort of alluded to in sort of prior to this that you have your friends and family around you for support. It's not until you actually meet other patients or are sort of in the environment that actually weird enough for me it felt more reassuring then than
Yeah.
it did going around sort of getting support from friends and family because it was just such an unknown at the time.
It is, and there are the weirdness, particularly with teenagers, which it is because it is so tough. When you are young, you are not meant to be ill. Our society doesn't do ill in teenagers. Our
No.
society does, all the stuff you see on Facebook, Instagram, the media. You're out doing stuff.
Yeah.
So it is immensely tough. And with young people as well, we see these strange emotional sways. I don't know. I should be asking you, Charlie. When you'd finished treatment and got your remission first time round, did you get a bit of an emotional dip about 3 or 4 months afterwards? And I'll give you the background because we see with teenagers in particular that when we pull them into our fold and we take them away from their blossoming independent lives and we bring them into the clinic and we give them structure and chemotherapy and radiotherapy, nurses and blood tests, and you take over, you almost turn them back into children, with us being a very parental type thing. And it's a strange thing that you then release them into the world. You've finished, dusted, you've had your last scan, you're cured. And then they can quite commonly, 3 or 4 months down the line, have a sort of, oh my goodness, where am I type thing. It's almost like a PTSD. People talk about a wave that suddenly catches over and hits them 3 or 4 months later. I don't know
Yeah, I
whether you
mean,
get that.
it's really interesting you play mentions that. I mean, I personally was there a sort of slump, if you like, as you mentioned. I know I went out and had a party. I certainly know that much once I finished. But yeah,
Yeah.
I don't recall there was, but I think if that clearly, as you say, everyone's different in terms of how they deal with these sort of this and I guess that's where and evidently this is why I'm here now as a sort of a resource, but clearly that's where resources and everything otherwise are really important, I think, because be that the peaks and troughs that patients or prior patients sort of might be going through. I
Yeah.
think
And you
just having
can't
that sense
always,
of community is really important, isn't it? Or
yeah.
something
And
just to
you
fall
can't,
back on at least.
and because you can't necessarily predict them, you can have people who are completely switched on, absolutely fine, and then a year after their treatment, they can have these dips. It's yeah. I mean, you were too busy sunbathing and going around the world, no doubt,
No,
chasing
no.
poor young women.
I thought we weren't going to sort of pay mention to that, but I know. I mean, we go to the treatments, but let's say every single patient is different, right? Their DNA makeup, exception otherwise. But you have to, as a takeaway, I'd always call you my personal Willy Wonka, if you like, in terms of pulling that from this shelf, this from shelf area. Right, this is the perfect for me, the perfect remedy that is going to be the best potential in terms of trying to what's the word I'm looking for?
What? Cure it.
Cure. That's the one. God, I should know that. Cure.
You're
Exactly
allowed
that.
to use that
Because
word now, Charlie.
then and then they all have their different side effects. Be that hair loss, infertility, and everything otherwise. So I guess is there a
Yes.
fine line of trying to say I want to do the best for my patient, but without sort of doing the most most damage? Does that sound right?
Yeah, no. So, Charlie, I mean, you're going straight to the nub of cancer treatment. Is obviously you're trying to optimize results while minimizing both short
Yeah.
and long term toxicity, because all of our drugs are poisonous in their own way. And, you may or may not remember when I consented you for treatment, I had to include that. What is the percentage chance that you actually die because of chemotherapy? Because
Mm.
anyone taking medical consent in this day and age has got to talk about not just the everyday side effects, the nausea and vomiting, but the more serious stuff. You touched on infertility. You touched on
Yeah.
organ damage. People getting sick, coming into hospital. You actually had quite a good run with all of that type of stuff, but not everybody does. And it is very challenging. I think you over compliment me on my Willy Wonka style of plucking this from the shelf, and that. I mean, cancer treatment and medicine is quite regulated. That we work within broad guidelines of how we apply different treatments. Your case was actually a little bit unusual, which is why we sort of did a bit of mixing and matching. But it panned out well, and so that's what
Mm.
we're always aiming for.
But then you will always, as you say, you'll always preach to me thereafter. As you say, the long term, you've got to be very self aware in terms of about your day to day. Be that exposure to sun,
Yeah,
alcohol, drugs, whatever it
yeah,
is. You've just got to
yeah,
start thinking a little bit more clever in
yeah.
terms of or
Cardiovascular health.
cardio.
Thank you.
Cardio, exactly. I think you said we found a hole in my heart, didn't you? I
Oh
know. I know
God,
it's
yeah.
been broken a few times, but I didn't realise it had a hole.
Well, that is again back to the joy of modern medicine and screening. The more tests you do in a human being, you find tiniest bits of this, tiniest bits of that. So we're not going to worry about that. No, no, Charlie, you followed all the rules apart from coming back with your suntan constantly. So
Yeah.
I think that
Well,
might be the third time I mentioned it, so I won't mention it again.
no, not at all. It's a sometime that is now sadly gone, given that I've been in the UK for God knows how long since. But there we go. um, I'm just trying to think, and in terms of information, sort of now that we've got you here, for those listeners,
Well, I think the key thing is trying to retain positivity. I think we see you and
massively.
I both know you meet all sorts of different characters in life. You have the glass half empty and the glass half full person. I think when you are taking on a cancer diagnosis, cancer treatment, we all get the impression that people that try and approach it in a positive can do well. They sort of manage psychologically, I guess, a bit better with the symptoms. I'm not saying they are more likely to be cured. I don't want somebody listening to this who thinks I'm a glass half empty person. I've got no chance. I
Right.
mean, that's obviously not true at all. But I think people like you, when you went through your treatment, you were always really positive. You tick off the things. Sometimes you just got to take each day as it comes, and you do better by not thinking the bigger picture, because you can't, because it's so
Mm.
crazily complicated. You got to get through this Tuesday, you got to get through this week, you got to get yourself to March, you got to get yourself to the end of that treatment block. And I
Yeah.
think setting those little goals, eating well, staying healthy, keeping social networks. You had that. You had your great family. I was reminding you the other day that your lovely father, and when you finished your treatment, he gave me a nice bottle. That was very decent of him.
It-
Family networks, they really do help. See, it
Mm.
helps share the bad times. It helps all of you enjoy the good times when they come as well. So I think those things can all help people getting through tough times. But it's just think sensibly. And if you're having a good day, you get out, you do some exercise, you go walk and keep yourself mobile. Good data supports that. Exercise as part of cancer therapy is a good thing. I mean, these are all probably fairly obvious things that your listeners will resonate with, but perhaps worth saying.
Well, no, 100%, and I think that's a massive takeaway from this. Is whilst it can be an extremely daunting time, to retain some kind of PMA, positive mental attitudes. Well, I think in life generally is a good thing, right? But in particular, in terms of
I
someone
agree with that.
taking on sort of cancer treatment, I think, try if one can, with a smile on your face, as wretched as it might be, and the peaks and troughs that you're likely to sort of embark on, as you go through the journey, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, the challenges of life.
The
Yeah.
challenges of life, exactly. Yeah, so let's not go down that route, otherwise we could be here forever, right?
Well, you've got many other podcasts to come, Charlie, so I will
Well,
be listening intently to
fingers
how you
crossed.
take
This
it.
doesn't fall. I did mention you were the first, so, and I'm sure thus far this has been absolutely fascinating. Just everyone's trying to find the cure for cancer, right? And let's hope one day that does finally happen. But what for you in your lifetime would sort of potentially be like utopia, if you like, just particularly maybe specifically for all things blood cancer as a sort
Yeah,
of.
I think Of course, when people talk about the cure for cancer, that is, of course, too simplistic because
Mm.
cancer is so many different things. It's like saying the cure for infectious diseases when, malaria is totally different from tuberculosis and
Mm.
pancreatic cancer is totally different from lymphoma. But I think if you said to me, what are the major areas of breakthrough? They are understanding how cancer cells signal within them. So, how they are getting their growth signals, how they're dividing, how they're metastasizing, and being able to target these key signaling pathways that have gone wrong. We can target them with what we call small molecule inhibitors. So, these are the things you take as tablets. And if I see in my field, but also in other fields, how these have already made such a major impact. So, that's point number one. But point number two has to be how we are harnessing the immune system, how we're harnessing our own immune systems to attack cancer. And that comes within our bodies. So infusing specific antibodies that enhance what we call T cell mediated killing of cancer. So there are these things called the PD-1 blockers that remove this inhibitory go to sleep signal on our immune system. It's so weird, but a lot of cancers are thriving because they in effect are putting our immune system to sleep. And Nobel Prize in Medicine a few years ago was centered on this whole principle about this PD-1 axis. And for some cancers like Hodgkin lymphoma, it seems to work amazingly well, and other solid organ cancers. And then you have other cancers such as the leukemias where this targeting at this axis just doesn't seem to make any difference.
Mm.
But that's all broadly in the whole immune area, the arena of the immune system. And that keeps on expanding. We can manipulate our cells. There's this thing called CAR T cell medicine, which is now rolling out in certain areas of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and acute leukemia, where you harvest off a patient's T cells, you send them over to California and they manipulate them in a lab. They get them to express a special construct that attacks the cancer. You grow them up, get loads of these cells, whiz them back to the UK. We then bring them into the hospital, give them a bit of chemo, infuse their supercharged T cells, which then attack the cancer. And honestly, one infusion will put it into a remission. And we in Cambridge, like other of the national CAR T cell centres, are seeing remarkable data. Patients who truly would have been dying from their refractory aggressive non-Hodgkin lymphomas and acute leukemias who have been cured by this strategy. Now, it doesn't work for everyone, so it's not a sort of win on every occasion. But when you said to me, what have I seen and what do I continue to expect in terms of the major things? It's that type of thing. Learning how we manipulate immune systems to fight off these diseases. But it's part of a big picture. Because
Mm.
10, 20 years from now, we're going to be finding these cancers a lot earlier. We'll intervene with treatments that are much more effective. And we'll keep on going. Just till the whole body finally falls apart, Charlie. And
Yeah,
without being
well, there
too
you go,
pessimistic,
exactly.
we're all going to have dementia in our 90s being left behind. I
Yeah, well,
should.
that's inevitability, right? But um, well, I think really, I think if we rewind and just that stat I mentioned, I think that can be really probably put us off slightly. But actually, by all accounts, the takeaway here is everything is going in the right direction,
Yeah,
and one should be really encouraged by the
yeah.
current sort of landscape in terms of treatment, medicines, everything otherwise.
I think you've got to finish on a positive note. I mean, on
100%.
an individual level, you'll have listeners who've been devastated, their families by cancer, and it is truly, truly awful. In the broad picture, the field moves forward, and many of your listeners will be raising money for cancer charities. They'll be raising money for research, and I just praise them all for the efforts that people are doing. Good folk out there doing their bit, and it keeps pushing the field forward.
Awesome. I think that is a really lovely way to sort of wrap things up, George. And I mean, what can I say? It's been an absolute privilege and lovely to see you in a different guise, if you like, on this occasion. And maybe we can try and get you back in a year's time when that medicine and treatment continues on to escalate in terms of embarrassments. But thanks
It
so much
will.
for your time.
Well, Charlie,
It's been a
thank
real
you very much having me as your first guest on your
well,
podcast. I wish you all the
well,
very best.
fantastic. Well, I'll let you get back. You know, you don't want to miss gladiators, do you? Being sat there.
That's me. That's me.
All right, mate.
Right.
Well, I'll see you soon.
You
All
will.
right.
Charlie, you
Take
keep
care,
well.
buddy.
Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye bye.